All right, so moving on in the narrative to chapter 14. I want to devote just this video this time to one chapter, chapter 14. As we move, the novel gains quite a bit of momentum as we move. We found in chapter 13 where the Glanton gang had become a war machine on the loose, massacring anyone and everyone. Peaceful Indians called the Tigwa, who weren't warriors at all. They just massacred and scalped them, and we saw them on the loose as a rogue war machine, an external proletariat that has gotten loose within Mexico. And the whole novel, notice, so I want to step back in this chapter, just focus on one chapter, 14, and step back and take a look at the narrative as a whole, the geography, and where things are situated here, because there's an order to this novel. It's not random. I remember on my first reading of this novel, I had a hard time following it because it seemed so random. But you can't read this novel without checking maps, dates, diagrams, watching videos on YouTube about the history of the Mexican-American War. Nothing will make sense if you don't have all this context, because McCarthy has spent quite a bit of energy on this, the same way Melville did with Moby Dick, or Joyce did with Ulysses, or Finnegan's Wake, or Pynchon did with Gravity's Rainbow. These guys put in the work, and they expect you, the reader, to also put in the work to understand the world that they're creating here. So I want to take a look at the itinerary, looking here at Sepich's map, which there's a map that he gives. You can actually Google it and pull it up. Now note that the narrative takes place, on the one hand, between the Rio Grande, which divides Texas from Mexico. Then we have in between the Rio Grande to the east, and then to the west we have the Colorado River, and in between we have the two states of Chihuahua near the Rio Grande on the east, and then Sonora near the Colorado River on the west here. And the novel entirely takes place here between these two great rivers. And these two rivers are really, they're analogous to the rivers of the old world, let's say the Nile, but an even better analogy is to the Tigris and the Euphrates. Mesopotamia emerged, it was always the land of the two rivers, and emerged out of that. And the Southwest, too, is a civilization that may in the future be referred to as the land of the two rivers, the Rio Grande and the Colorado, although I'm aware that the Colorado, because of global warming, is slowly drying up. Mark Reisner details all that in his great book, Cadillac Desert, which I highly recommend. And John Wesley Powell had a very difficult time going down the Colorado. It's a very rough, difficult to navigate river. It's violent. There's lots of rapids, whereas the Rio Grande is quite a bit more peaceful, more like the Nile, let's say, as compared to the Tigris and Euphrates, which would often flood and were also wild rivers. So the narrative has gone, looking then at Sepich's map, and I highly regard you to pull up Sepich's map on a Google image search and take a look at it. The narrative has gone from the kid entering and crossing the Rio Grande, so from Texas, and nothing really untoward or violent happens on the Rio Grande, in contradistinction to what happens in chapter 19 at the Colorado River. And he winds up eventually in jail in Chihuahua City, which is the capital of Chihuahua. So he winds up there with Toadvine. Then he joins the Glanton gang. And as they leave that, they go from Chihuahua City to Corralitos, which is quite a bit further north. And then from Corralitos, they go to Janos, which is even further north across the Casas Grandes River. And then from that, up near the Animas Peaks. And now the Animas Peaks is not that far away from Santa Rita del Cobre, a little bit further north, which is associated with a major copper mine. So I want to draw your attention to the fact that a lot of what is going on here has to do with mining and metallurgy. The regions of the Southwest, Joel Garreau had said in his book, 9 Nations of North America, that the Great Empty Quarter in the north, its primary economy is based on mining and metallurgy, where it meets in Denver and Boulder with the breadbasket to the east, which is where the economy is all, of course, on wheat and so forth. And then he says of Mex America, which is basically the entire Southwest that used to be Mexico, There's a concern with water. There's not much water, but he doesn't mention or emphasize that the Southwest too is also preoccupied with mining and metallurgy, and that really the whole reason why the United States government went to war against Mexico was to get access to all these metals: gold, silver, copper, cinnabar, all of these metals that were known about, especially in and around Tucson. There's quite a few of them. So then they go to to Gallego, where they massacre all the Apaches, the Heleños Apaches, and then they take their scalps to Chihuahua City, as we have seen, where they are greeted with open arms. They're celebrated, but it very quickly degenerates into debauchery, and they become a rogue war machine, totally out of control. So then they leave Chihuahua City, and this, in a sense, is then the second expedition. They leave Chihuahua City and they go to Coyame, where they are not welcome at all, and then they go from there north to the Waco tanks, which is actually on the east of the Rio Grande. So they have to cross the Rio Grande to get there, and the tanks are cisterns where there's a good water supply. So they go there, and then to to Carrizal, and they're just spreading mayhem as they go to Carrizal, and then to Nacori, and now in this chapter 14, to Jesus Maria. And so we're at chapter 14. Jesus Maria now is associated with silver mining. It's located on the old Silver Road, which connects it with Chihuahua City. So they wind up in Jesus Maria, and chapter 14 is concerned with their adventures or their debaucheries in Jesus Maria on the one hand, and then in Urus in Sonora, which is the capital of Sonora. So what happens is that when they are in this town, they go in, there's a storm, they go into Jesus Maria. Glanton gets sick with a fever, so he's put out for a while. And then there's the great town square there, as there is in all these Mexican towns, the great town square. And then the judge is out sort of wandering in the rain, and he comes upon a boy who wants to sell him a couple of puppies. And the judge looks him over and he says, "I'll take them both." He reaches out his hand and he grabs both of the puppies, holds them in his left hand. Remember that in myth, the left hand is the hand of destruction. And with his right hand, he pulls a coin out, does the coin behind the ear trick that we've seen over and over again, and then gives the boy the coin. So the boy has the coin. And the judge, with his left hand, then walks up to the stone bridge overlooking a river and simply throws the puppies into the river, just for the hell of it, just because he can. And so the puppies are down in there. And meanwhile, the character of their gang, called the Van Diemen Lander, his name is Bathcat, actually. And Van Diemen Land, of course, is the old name for Tasmania, located south of Australia, where the Aboriginals were wiped clean. They were ethnically cleansed completely. And the Van Diemen Lander is from Tasmania. So he has experience with genocide. He has experience with genocide. And so he's taking a piss at the other end of the river, and he sees the puppies, pulls out his gun, and he shoots them in the water. For what reason, we don't know, to put them out of their misery or just to contribute to the meanness that is going on. But that then sparks a shootout in the town square. Glanton comes out from his sickness, and he comes out and he rips the Mexican flag down and ties it to the tail of a mule. Then he gets on the mule and he starts parading the Mexican flag from the ass of the mule, making fun of it. Somebody shoots the mule, and the mule topples over, and Glanton gets up and starts firing recklessly at the windows, hits an old woman. Then a huge shootout then ensues in the town square, all kinds of chaos. Then they notice, coming up the road, the town is located on, sort of on a mountainous area, and they see coming up the road a train of mules, all carrying quicksilver, or cinnabar, or mercury. It's all the same thing. And the thing about mercury or quicksilver is that you need it to extract silver from ore. So they have to have it. So this train of mules is coming along on the edge of a cliff with a very narrow road. Glanton sees this, and the judge sees this, and they start pecking off the muleteers, just shooting them with delight, watching the mules go plummeting over the edge of the cliff. and they go crashing and exploding on the rocks below, mixing mercury and blood in these wonderful, colorful explosions as the poor hapless guys go over the edge, and they wipe out this whole train of mules, just for the sheer fun of it. So that's what happens in the town of Jesus Maria. Pretty soon they get bored and they run out of fun. Then they move on and they migrate west. So note that the narrative is always moving. It seems to meander around quite a bit, but it eventually moves from east to west. So it has a telos, it has a goal, it has a purpose. That's the path of the sun and the stars and planets and moon, east to west. The kid is hardly ever mentioned, but remember that he was born under a Leonid shower. Leo is the sign of the sun. So he's associated with the sun and with fire. He was born out of fire, even though he doesn't say much. So then they have to go through a jungle, and as they're going through this jungle on the way to Urus, which is the capital of Sonora. The judge is shooting birds, keeping his notebook, and he protests that there shouldn't be anything allowed on the earth without his consent. And he says that all the birds should be kept in a zoo. And the person that he's dialoguing with says, well, that would be one hell of a zoo. And the judge says, yeah, it sure would, but that's where they belong. In other words, human beings, as far as the judge is concerned, must have power over nature. They must not allow nature to dictate to them. So this is part of his meanness, part of the reason why he's destroying every living thing he sees as he goes along, because he has this prejudice that the human being is at the top of the chain of being and is lord over all, and nothing must be allowed to escape his compass. So they're going through the jungle, and then they cross the Yaqui River, which is named after Yaqui Indians, and they make it to the capital of Sonora, which is a town called Urus, which was founded in 1644 by a Jesuit missionary named Francisco Paris. And so Urus is probably a corruption of Paris. And this town had to fend off, in the 1870s, it had to fend off a bunch of attacks from both Yaqui Indian uprisings and also the Apache, led by Geronimo, who attacked this town. So the town has a history. So what they do then is they go to this town, and they go to a hostel, and the German proprietor at the hostel says, it's all yours, I'm leaving, and he disappears. He doesn't want anything to do with what's going on. So in the backyard of the hostel, they light a huge bonfire, they bring in whores, and there's revelry, and they're roasting goats on spits, and then mangy dogs come in, and they start fighting over each other for access to what's left of the goats. They're fighting, ripping each other apart. Then Glanton merrily comes out with his huge Bowie knife and starts hacking into the skulls of the dogs, delighted with chopping them into bits and pieces. Doesn't do much good, because when he goes back inside, the surviving dogs then continue fighting over the bones of the goats. And so this is the kind of mayhem and chaos that the Glanton gang brings with them wherever they go. The patron god of this novel is Shiva. Shiva is the god of destruction and chaos and burial grounds and so forth. This is the patron god of this novel. Whereas, let's say, the patron god of Finnegan's Wake is Vishnu, the god who sleeps and whose dream is the world, just as the god of Ulysses, man's daytime waking consciousness, is Brahma, the god who comes up out of Vishnu and wakes up with his four faces, bringing the 4 points of the compass into being in waking consciousness. But this novel is definitely under the patronage of Shiva. So that's it for this so far. They're headed for the Colorado River and for the disaster that will befall them at the Colorado River in chapter 19, which will then end this middle section of the novel. So we'll pick up next time then with chapter 15.